"Leave now," she said at my grandson's birthday days later. She was begging for my help. I was standing in the backyard I had paid to landscape, holding a cake I had baked at 4 in the morning, when my son's wife pointed at the gate and told me, in front of 30 guests, to leave. She said I was an embarrassment. She said I didn't belong there. And everyone just stood there, holding their paper plates, watching a 73-year-old woman get thrown out of her own grandson's birthday party like a stray dog that wandered in off the street. I want to tell you what happened next because I think a lot of you have lived some version of this. But before I do, if you're the kind of person who believes quiet dignity eventually wins, hit that like button right now and subscribe if you haven't, because I have a lot more of these stories to tell you. And I'd love to know in the comments where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one. Keeps an old woman company. My name is Lisa. I'm 73 years old, and until 11 months ago, I thought I understood my family. I thought I understood what love looked like when it had 30 years to grow. I was wrong, and it cost me almost everything before I got it back. Let me start at the beginning because you need to understand who I was before that afternoon in the backyard so you understand who I became after it. I raised my son David alone. His father left when David was 4, and I never remarried, not because no one asked, but because I decided early on that my whole life would go into that boy, and it did. I worked 2 jobs for most of his childhood. I was a seamstress by trade, and later I ran a small tailoring shop out of the front room of my house, taking in wedding dresses and suit alterations from 6 in the morning until whenever the last customer left. David never went without. He had piano lessons. He had a car for his 16th birthday, used but reliable, because I saved for 3 years to buy it outright so he'd never carry a car payment. He went to college on money I'd been putting aside since he was born. I tell you all this not to brag, but because it matters for what comes later. Because when David married a woman I'll call Kelly, I didn't hesitate to love her too. I welcomed her the way I would have welcomed a daughter I never had. When they struggled to afford a house in the first years of their marriage, I sold a piece of land my own mother had left me, land I'd planned to leave to David one day anyway, and I gave them the down payment. No loan, no strings, a gift because that's what family does. When my grandson Tyler was born, I was in that hospital room within the hour. I have not missed a single birthday, a single school play, a single scraped knee that needed a grandmother's hand to hold. For 8 years I was there. And for 8 years I thought Kelly loved me too. She called me mom sometimes, which always caught in my throat in the best way. She'd call me for advice about the baby, about recipes, about arguments with David that she didn't want him to know she was venting about. I believed, truly believed, that I had built something rare. A mother-in-law relationship without the resentment you hear about, without the tension. I thought I was one of the lucky ones. I didn't understand until much later that Kelly had never stopped keeping score. That every gift I gave, every hour I spent with Tyler, every dollar of that down payment, had been quietly filed away in her mind not as love, but as leverage, as a debt she resented owing, and a woman she resented needing. The birthday party was for Tyler's 8th birthday. I'd spent 2 weeks planning my part of it. I made him a train-shaped cake because he was obsessed with trains that year, the kind of obsession only an 8-year-old can sustain with total joyful seriousness. I hand-stitched him a little conductor's vest, navy blue with brass buttons I'd found at an estate sale, because I still remembered how to sew, and because store-bought gifts never felt like enough to me. I wanted to give him something with my hands in it. I arrived early to help set up, the way I always did. The backyard was full of balloons and rented tables, a bounce house humming in the corner, 30 or so guests from Kelly's side of the family and David's co-workers and Tyler's little school friends running between everyone's legs. I remember feeling so happy standing there. I remember thinking this is what it was all for. All those years of work, all that sacrifice, it built this. This backyard, this laughter, this boy blowing out candles. Kelly found me near the dessert table around 2 in the afternoon. She had a glass of wine in her hand, and I noticed, though I didn't think much of it at the time, that her voice had that particular brightness people get when they've had one glass too many and are looking for somewhere to point their mood. She looked at my cake. Then she looked at my vest, still folded in its box, waiting for the right moment to give to Tyler. And she laughed, not a kind laugh, and said loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, that she'd already ordered a real cake from a bakery, that my train cake looked like something from a church potluck, and that Tyler didn't need a homemade vest, he needed toys, real gifts, things his friends would actually be impressed by. I felt my face go hot, but I still tried to laugh it off. I said something like, "Oh, it's just a little something extra, don't worry, we can put mine out too." And that's when she said it. She set her wine glass down on the table, hard enough that a little sloshed over the rim, and she said, "You know what, Lisa? I think you should just go. This isn't really your event. You've been hovering all day and it's exhausting. Leave now, okay? Just go home." 30 guests. My son David 20 feet away, deep in conversation with a coworker, not hearing a word of it. My grandson laughing on the bounce house, not seeing his grandmother's face crumble in real time. And I stood there, holding a cake I'd made at 4 in the morning, and I did the only thing I could think to do with any dignity left. I nodded. I said, "All right," and I walked to my car, put the cake and the vest in the passenger seat, and drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel the entire way. I want to be honest with you. I cried that whole drive. Not just because of the humiliation, though God, that stung, but because for the first time in 8 years I understood with total clarity that this woman had never respected me. That every warm word had been a performance for as long as it served her. And I felt something in me go very quiet and very still, the way water gets right before it freezes. I didn't call David that night. I didn't want to put him in the middle, and honestly I needed time to think. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, and I thought about everything Kelly didn't know about me, because there was quite a lot she didn't know. Here is the part of the story most people don't expect. I mentioned I sold land to help with their down payment. What I never told Kelly, and what David only partially understood, was the actual structure of that gift. I hadn't simply handed over cash. On the advice of a lawyer friend I'd known for 30 years, I'd structured a portion of the money as a private loan secured against the property, not because I ever intended to collect it, but because that same lawyer had warned me gently that marriages sometimes fail, and that if David's ever did, I wanted to make sure my gift wasn't simply absorbed into a divorce settlement and handed to someone who might one day resent me. At the time, it felt almost paranoid to do it that way. David didn't love the idea, but he trusted me, and he signed the paperwork without much fuss, because in his mind it was a formality that would never matter. I also hadn't told anyone that I still owned outright the small rental property 2 streets over from David and Kelly's house, the very house David and Kelly had been renting for the 2 years before I helped them buy their own home. I owned it because my late husband's brother had left it to me unexpectedly years before, and I'd quietly kept it as a rental managed by a property company, generating a small monthly income one never talked about because it felt indulgent to mention it. Kelly, as it turned out, did not know this property belonged to me. She thought it belonged to the property management company outright. I tell you these 2 details now because they matter enormously for what happened 4 days later. 4 days after the birthday party, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. It was Kelly. I almost didn't answer, but old habits die hard, and some small hopeful part of me still wondered if she was calling to apologize. She was not calling to apologize. She was calling because David had lost his job 3 days earlier. The company he worked for had a sudden, brutal round of layoffs, and he was one of 40 people let go with almost no warning. And in the same week, with a cruelty of timing that almost seemed designed by fate, the small business Kelly ran out of a rented commercial space. A boutique selling handmade candles and home goods had been informed by its landlord that the building had been sold and all tenants needed to vacate within 30 days. That building, the one Kelly had rented her shop space in for the last 2 years, was owned by the property management company I used. I didn't manage it myself, I want to be clear. I had simply put my rental property, the one near their home, under the same regional company, and it turned out that company also handled several commercial properties, including the one Kelly's shop was in, which had recently been sold to a developer planning to convert it into condos. I had absolutely nothing to do with that sale. It was pure coincidence. But Kelly didn't know that yet, and frankly at that moment, neither did I fully understand the overlap. What I did understand within the first 2 minutes of that phone call was that Kelly was calling me 4 days after telling me to leave her son's birthday party like an unwanted guest, because she needed money. David's severance wouldn't stretch far. Their mortgage payment, the one built partly on the loan I'd quietly secured against their house, was due in 2 weeks. Kelly's business income had just evaporated, and somewhere in her mental math, she had arrived at the only person she knew with any financial cushion, me. She didn't apologize first. That's what struck me most. She launched straight into the crisis. David lost his job, the shop is closing, we're going to fall behind on the mortgage, can you help us, can you maybe cover next month just until things stabilize? I let her finish. I sat very still at my kitchen table, and I let every word land, and when she was done I said quite calmly, Kelly, 4 days ago you told me to leave my grandson's birthday party in front of 30 people. Do you remember that? There was a long silence on the line. Then she said in a smaller voice that she'd had too much wine, that she didn't mean it, that she'd been stressed about hosting. I told her I understood stress. I told her I'd been stressed plenty of times in my life too. Raising a son alone, running a business from my living room, going without new shoes some years so David could have piano lessons. And not once in 73 years had stress ever made me tell a family member to get out of a room like they were nothing. I could hear her crying a little, and some old part of me, the part that had spent 8 years wanting so badly to be her family, wanted to soften right then and there. But I made myself sit with the memory of that backyard instead. The wine glass hitting the table. The word leave said so easily, so certain I would simply absorb it and keep coming back. I told her I needed to think and I hung up. That evening David called me himself. He didn't know I already knew about the layoff in the shop. Kelly hadn't told him she called me first. He was gentler than she'd been, more ashamed, clearly hating that he even had to make the call. He told me about the layoff. He told me things were tight. He didn't ask for money outright, not at first, he just wanted to talk. And somewhere in that conversation I finally told him what had happened at the birthday party, because he genuinely hadn't known. He'd assumed I left early because I was tired. I have never heard my son go so quiet. He apologized to me for 20 minutes. He said he didn't know, he said he was furious. He said no one should ever speak to his mother that way in his own house, in front of his own son. And I believed every word because David has never, not once in his life, been a cruel person. He'd simply been absent that day, distracted, the way people often are at their own child's birthday party. And he had no idea his wife had quietly poisoned the one relationship that had never asked him for a single thing in return. I told David I loved him and I loved Tyler more than anything on this earth, and that none of what I was about to do was about punishing him. But I also told him gently that I would not be handing over money to smooth things over as if the birthday party had never happened. Not yet. Not until Kelly and I had an honest conversation, face to face, without wine, without an audience. Without her assuming my help would simply arrive on command. Here's where I want to pause and ask you something. If you've made it this far, you already know how these situations usually end in the stories you watch. The old woman holds firm, the arrogant daughter-in-law grovels, dignity is restored. But I promise you what actually happened in my kitchen 3 days later was quieter and, I think, more honest than that. Kelly came to my house alone. She looked terrible, not dramatically so, but the specific exhaustion of someone whose whole financial floor had dropped out from under them in 1 week. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once taught her how to hem a pair of pants for David's job interview. Years earlier, back when things between us still felt real. She apologized properly this time. No excuses about wine. She said she'd been humiliated in front of her own family that day because I'd shown up with something handmade when she'd spent money trying to impress her side of the family. And instead of feeling grateful for my effort, she'd felt exposed by it. And she'd taken that shame out on me because I was safe to hurt. She said it wasn't an excuse. She said she knew it wasn't. I appreciated the honesty more than I expected to. I told her that for 8 years I had given her my time, my money, my grandmother's love, without once keeping score. And that the one thing I asked in return, without ever saying it out loud, was basic respect. I told her that respect isn't something you can turn on only when you need a favor. I did help them in the end, but not the way she'd hoped. I didn't simply write a check. I sat down with David and Kelly together and I offered a real plan. I would cover their mortgage for exactly 2 months while David searched for work, structured as a documented loan, the same way the original down payment had been, with clear terms both of them signed. I offered to let Kelly use the empty rental unit I owned, rent-free for 3 months, as a pop-up space to sell her candles and goods while she found a permanent shop, since it turned out I did, technically, have a card to play there after all. And I told her plainly that if she ever spoke to me the way she had at that birthday party again, in front of Tyler or anyone else, the help would end permanently, no second chances. She agreed to all of it. She cried again, but a different kind of crying this time. Not performance, just relief and shame mixed together. It's been 11 months since that birthday party. David found a new job within 10 weeks, a better one, honestly, than the one he lost. Kelly's little shop is doing well in that rental space. She's since found her own permanent location and pays me back a little each month, though I've told her more than once she doesn't have to. And at Tyler's 9th birthday 3 weeks ago, Kelly herself insisted I bring the cake. She asked for the train design again, actually, because Tyler had asked for it by name, remembering the one from the year before even though he never got to eat it. I stood in that same backyard, and this time Kelly stood beside me while I cut the cake, and she told the whole table, unprompted, that her mother-in-law made the best cakes in the family and always would. I'm not going to pretend that fixed everything overnight, or that I've fully let my guard down again. Trust, once it cracks, takes a long time to set the way it used to. But I learned something at 73 years old that I wish I'd understood decades earlier. Love without boundaries isn't generosity, it's just an invitation to be taken for granted. The moment I finally drew a line, even gently, even without raising my voice, was the same moment I finally got real respect back. Not because I punished anyone, but because I simply stopped accepting less than I deserved. If this story meant something to you, I'd be so grateful if you hit like and subscribed, and told me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single comment, and honestly, hearing from all of you is one of the best parts of my week now. Thank you for sitting with an old woman's story. I'll see you in the next one.